Hello, everybody. Welcome to another episode of The Rundown. I'm Sunny Galt. I'm a messenger with United Network News, UNN, and we are the official news channel for CARE, which stands for the Center for Amity and Restoration of Earth. And what we do through our newscast is we bring you the real news because there's a lot of information floating out there, a lot of disinformation, misinformation. And if you don't know the difference between the two, misinformation is information that's shared and people don't really know if it's true or not. They may think it's true, but there's nothing malice about it, right? They're not trying to cause harm. They're usually trying to do good, but it's really hard to know what the truth is. And then disinformation is information that is purposely spread to confuse and frustrate and spread lies. And so we're trying to avoid that. We're trying to clear the air with what we call the real news, which we're not getting through mainstream media, and we're not getting it through alternative media as well. That's just the truth. There's a lot of well-meaning people, but not a lot of truth getting out there. And we have a newscast that's released through our website at unitednetwork.earth. Our newscast comes out every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. If you want more information on that, and if you want to get access to all of our content right away, visit our website. You can learn more about our membership plans. But we also release our newscast 1 week later for free on YouTube and Rumble. So all of our social media sites, including both of those sites, are located at the bottom of our website. You can go there and find the link, because I know sometimes it's hard to search for stuff, and I wouldn't be surprised if we are shadow banned. So, that's a great way to find our direct links and get all of our content, even if it's released a little bit later. The purpose of this podcast, though, is to give you guys a heads up or fill some of you guys in, even if you're regular viewers of our newscast, as to the stories that were covered during this last week, because we talk about a lot of stuff. And it's possible you may have missed a newscast. You want to kind of get the shortened Cliff Notes version. This is a good resource for that. Also, if you want to share UNN and the information we talk about with someone else, it's kind of a big leap to just say, go to the website and get a subscription, right? A lot of people aren't, so into that. But you can share these episodes and see if it resonates with them. And if it does, fantastic. If this doesn't resonate with you, there's a million other podcasts you can check out. But I believe that you're here now for a reason. And to get this information and to listen and to apply this information. Because in order to know where our planet is going, we have to know where we're at now. And that's what we're trying to do, right, with our newscast, and then give you a wrap-up on this podcast. And we cover all sorts of stories. We cover local stories. Those are told through the eyes of what we call our field messengers, or maybe citizen journalists is another term to describe that. But these are everyday people like you. We do offer some training. I hesitate to call it training because you don't need training. What you need is what you already have in your hands. You have a cell phone, right, that can record audio and video, and you can share stories of what is going on in your community. And we rely on that, and we get stories from all around the world. And part of this is us getting to know each other a little bit better. So we invite you guys to create those stories, and we will share those on our newscast. We also talk about the new Earth, which is where our planet is going, how humanity is changing because we have amazing superhuman skills that have laid dormant for a very long time. And we have to remind everybody about how incredible we are. And that's not egotistical. That is reality. And we can use these skills in amazing ways to help our planet and help other people. We talk about regional stories. So these are some of the stories that you may see here and there in mainstream media, but sometimes we have a different spin on it because what is out there in mainstream is not necessarily the truth. Okay, but these are regional stories from around the world. And then we have our World Situation Report with Kimberly Gogan from the Office of the Guardian. And this is an update on what is happening throughout the multiverse. And we've got some amazing stories we're going to share with you today about what God Source, the Creator, is doing, which is literally changing the fabric of reality. It's incredible. We're going to introduce you to some new beings. Stuff that you are not going to hear anywhere else, you are going to hear on this newscast. We get our information from Kim, who gets it primarily through the Alpha system, and we'll talk more about that as we go. But we have access, we have the highest level clearance through the alpha system, which means we have access to everything. If someone's having a meeting somewhere, we don't have to be invited. We can know exactly what they're saying. You really can't hide. The alpha system is an etheric system. It does not run on power like we would power up our computers and things like that. And it originates in the 9th density upper astral, where God Source, the creator, exists. So there is no taking it over. I'm sure the deep state would love to do that. They try to do that on a daily basis, and it's not working out so well for them. Surprise, surprise. As always, we encourage you guys not to just take our word for saying something is true, but to do your own research. Sometimes what we say is just a catalyst for you to go down your own rabbit holes, do your own research, seek source, and have your own discernment to know whether something is right or wrong. But always think critically, continue to ask questions, okay? So let me give you a quick overview of what we're going to talk about in today's episode, because this is probably going to be more of a long one. I've got a couple longer sound bites I'm going to share with you as part of the World Situation Report. So we're going to talk about our field messenger reports from Brazil, Uganda, Australia, and the Dominican Republic. In the New Earth, we're talking about dreaming and where we go when we dream, which is very interesting. We're talking about sound healing, which we know there are many different ways to heal our bodies, that we can do that on our own. We do not need to be taking pills and injections and things like that. We can naturally heal our bodies, and using sound healing is one way to do that. So we'll discuss that. Also, sovereignty in the workplace. So as we transition into the new earth, what is the workplace going to look like? What is your role in it? What is your employer's role in it? Or if you are the employer, how can you handle things a little bit differently? In regional news, we have a few different topics, a bunch of stories, but a few topics we'll focus on, including health. We've got some stories about our schools, as well as workers and employment. And then finally, in the World Situation Report, we are learning about a new group of beings. Well, they're not new, but we're just learning about them, called the Ancient Ones, or sometimes they're referred to as the Celestials. And they are back here helping right now with the multiverse. And this is the last bit of cleanup, according to Kim, that needs to happen in order for us to move forward with full restoration and funds to be available for you guys to start your projects. So that's really exciting. We're also going to learn more about a program that the Deep State started, that the SSP tried to trigger, called the Cicada program. And you may have been hearing about cicadas on alternative media. The information you're getting out there is not accurate. This is not about a bunch of little bugs coming back. So we'll explain that more. And then we'll talk a little bit about soul swaps and how this is not working out in the Deep State's favor. So let's go ahead and get started. Today is May 18th, 2024. Here is the rundown of stories you may have missed this week on UNN. All right, let's talk about our field messenger reports. We have reports from all over the world. And like I said before, you don't need training to do this. What we're trying to do is equip humanity and give you guys the confidence to be able to share the stories that are happening in your communities. Because this is one way we really got in trouble with mainstream media. We allow people to come into our communities and share their stories. And even if the reporter has good intentions with the story, trust me, I've worked in this business before, in the news business. There are many different levels of approval that a story has to go through before any audience listens to it, watches it. And so we have been controlled through these narratives. And so we think the best way to get out of that system of control is to hear it straight from the people that are being impacted by it. So if mainstream media is going to say there is a war and bombing and all this crazy stuff happening in a particular country, well, think of how easy it would be to disprove that by someone just walking outside of their home and saying, you know what, mainstream is saying this, or even alternative media is saying this, but let me show you what's happening here on the streets. This is how we break down their narratives. So we get people from all over the world to submit their stories. And sometimes they're more community-based, sometimes they're more quote-unquote newsy. And we've got a mixture of those for you from this past week. So let's kick things off. On Monday, we had a couple different stories. The first one is from Ingrid in Brazil, and this was more of a news type story. We have been talking about this in the regional news, but Brazil is having extreme flooding right now. This has hit Brazil within the last few weeks. They're saying this is one of the worst floods in the country's history. And Ingrid's report shows us the level of water and the destruction that it has caused. So again, this is a great example of someone saying, well, this may actually be true because look outside. And, I think she was showing us like a playground area. There were like basketball hoops and stuff. And this was right along, where the waters would come in and meet the land. And you could see everything was just underwater. And so she just shares what her community is experiencing as a result. We also had a report from Mwanda Michael, who is based out of Uganda. You know Mwanda Michael because he does a lot of reports for us. But he talks about how in this area that there are some protests going on from businesses. So business owners are unhappy about high government taxes. So what they did for a period of time is they closed up their shops, trying to raise awareness, because if you go to a store and they're closed, you want to know why the store is closed, right? And so this is an opportunity for people to learn about these high taxes. And that's not a good thing for their community because it's hurting their business owners. And so it's to raise awareness. So he shares more information about that. On Wednesday, Helen from Australia shares with us, I love Helen. She always does stories about nature, and this story is about seeds. She's done a couple of other stories, I believe, about seeds. But this is about how we can have an abundance of food and different types of trees out there that we can get food from if we naturally spread seeds wherever we go. And she literally shows us how she'll take seeds, natural seeds, and spread them out. And it really doesn't matter where you spread them. Now, I know we're going to have some people say, oh, I'm a gardener, or I know a lot about seeds. And yes, you can try to spread them, but if it's not on this soil or if it's next to this type of tree, it's going to overshadow it, blah, 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 blah. That is all true. But if we are all just randomly doing this, there's a lot of stuff that's going to stick as well. So when the government comes to us and says, hey, we're going to control your food supply, or we're going to put nasty chemicals in the food you're consuming, they can't control everything. They control their own farms. Okay, if you can even call them farms, right? Like the Monsantos and places like that. They're not going to control you spreading seeds in your community. So Helen just gets us to think of things a little bit differently. How hard would it be for you to take seeds from whatever you just ate and go out there and sprinkle it in the world, see what happens? And then we have a story from the Dominican Republic, Alberto, which is really interesting. So this was a story that was translated into English. So we've got English subtitles, but I believe it's in Spanish, if memory recalls. And he tells us about this aquaponics system that is set up. And it's really neat because they have a bunch of fish, and the water from where all the fish are is going into these different tubes, and it's being used to create this natural ecosystem where the fish and the waste from the fish are providing nutrients for these plants to grow. And this is all done in someone's backyard. So it sounds like really elaborate, but it doesn't have to be. So you're growing fish, the fish, this is just replicating what naturally happens out there in the world, naturally. But we're doing this in our own backyard. So it's a really interesting system. And then on Friday, we have a couple stories. So Mel from Australia shares what's going on in her backyard, which I think is interesting too. So we meet her backyard ducks and chickens. And the nice part of this is just seeing how people are integrating animals into their life. Because you might think, oh my gosh, why would someone just have ducks and chickens in their backyard? That's kind of our Western mentality. But I know the more, what's the word? It's not just age, but I guess the more I evolve, the more my mind evolves, the more connection I personally feel to having animals near me and communicating with animals. So I totally get, having animals in your backyard. This is something that I actually want to have, more of a farm type situation and taking care of the animals and getting my kids involved and all of that. And so I totally get that. And Mel shares how these ducks and chickens have changed her life and how her life has really benefited from it. And then Helen is back on Friday for another story, Helen from Australia. And she found mold. I don't know if it's in her actual home. It kind of looked like this might be a separate facility or separate place, but I'm not sure. There was mold on her property somewhere. And obviously that could pose a lot of, damage to humanity. We can get sick with mold. And so she shows us her whole process for getting rid of the mold, but how to do this naturally. Because there are devices out there that you can get to detect mold. And by the way, mold out there in nature is fine. And I believe Helen even mentioned that in her report. It's when it gets into our walls and things like that, and we're breathing in all the spores, like that's not a good thing for us health-wise. And Helen goes through her process of removing the mold naturally using vinegar and essential oils. To view any of these reports, if you're not a member, you can just wait a week and the entire newscast will be available on YouTube and Rumble. If you are a member, then you can watch the newscast right away through the UNN app. All right, let's talk about the new Earth. So this part of our newscast is meant to encourage you, inspire you to think about what is coming with our planet. I know with all the negative headlines coming from mainstream and alternative media, it is hard to see through the matrix. I get it. But don't believe the hype that they're putting out because it is inevitable. And we've talked about this before in the World Situation Report. We are now in a golden age. We were in a dark age. We were supposed to go into a neutral age, but the dark messed that up. And God Source, the creator, said, not only are we not going into a neutral age, but we are now going into a golden age of forevermore, being on the positive side of humanity, of life in general. So with that, we have to prepare for that because it is going to be a big change and it's not going to happen all at once. But this is what we call the new Earth. And the entire multiverse is changing. It's not just our planet. There are some people that will stick with this current Earth and go away from us. But those of you who have the vision that are here to take Earth to the next level, this is what we're going to experience. And we have to relearn who we are as humanity because we have amazing gifts that have laid dormant for a long time. So as part of the new Earth, I usually interview somebody and then we have some stories. And so on Monday, I had an interview with Carrie Kay. She's got a really popular YouTube channel you guys can check out. She calls herself a spiritual teacher. I love chatting with Carrie. She's one of my favorite people to interview. She talks about dreaming. Now, what happens when we dream? Because it's not just, your mind is catching up on what happened throughout the day and processing things. We actually travel. Some people call this astro traveling, okay? But your mind, your soul does not have to sleep. It is your body that has to sleep. So that frees up your mind for some incredible things. So we actually dream in 4D, Carrie says. And she explains that process a little bit more and what's actually happening. It's a fascinating segment. I encourage you guys to check it out. On Wednesday, I chat with David Gibson, and he is a sound healing visionary. And we start to talk about how we can heal our bodies through sound, because there are many different ways that we can naturally heal our bodies, including through our mind alone. But this is a process. There are a lot of limiting beliefs that we have to stop, thinking about, that we have to stop thinking that is truth, because just because we have believed something in the past doesn't necessarily make it true. We've been lied to about so many different things. So when it comes to sound healing, David goes through and he has done so much in this area. He has not only written books, but he has elicited real change in this industry. And his goal is to eliminate disease through the power of sound. But when we say sound healing, what exactly is that? What exactly is happening? And David breaks all that down for us. And then on Friday, we have an interview with Karen Sherwood. She is a business and career consultant, and she tells us where we're going and how our workplaces are going to be changing. And this really boils down to the relationships we have with people. And this particular segment is about workplace sovereignty. Just a funny little side note on this. I've had to spell the word sovereignty about 20 times this week. You would think I would know how to spell this word by now. It hasn't quite happened. I'm telling you what, I have to go back and copy and paste it from something else. Just a funny side note because everybody's learning. I'm learning too. When it comes to workplace sovereignty, this is about not just thinking about, okay, how can I do this to better my employer or my company? But it is a transition to thinking about how you can benefit as well and how companies can have that kind of mindset when they're hiring people and when they're helping people, because it should be beneficial for everyone. It shouldn't be that you have to work, 60, 70, 80 hours a week to get a promotion and your family falls apart in the meantime. So what does that actually look like? And I wanted to share a few fun stories with you guys that we shared in the New Earth over this last week. We are talking about surfing therapy. So this is regular therapy combined with ocean surfing to improve psychological, physical, and social well-being. And we're seeing more people use this type of therapy. Clients are opening up in more natural ways, which makes sense, right? I mean, you're out in nature. So you're able to see things a little bit differently. I never thought, laying on a couch, with your legs propped up was, the best way to do therapy. So getting out in nature, it just makes sense, right? And this is helping people battle depression, anxiety, as well as post-traumatic stress. Now, for all of you dog lovers out there, I am one of those people. We also had a story about a place called the Heavenly Resort in South Lake Tahoe in the United States, which isn't that the perfect name for a resort, by the way. They are home to what's called the Hard Team. So what is the Hard Team? It is a team of 7 avalanche dogs. That's what they're called. And this is a team that goes out to ensure the safety of skiers because these dogs, they have an incredible sense of smell. And if needed, they could help locate people who might be trapped under the snow. So it's just a nice uplifting story about how humanity is partnering with dogs to benefit other people. And then we have a story about worms. Worms and the benefits of worms. So I know a lot of us think, ooh, they're kind of slimy or whatever. There's a purpose. There's a purpose to everything God Source, the Creator, created. Okay, you just have to sometimes reconnect with nature and figure out, well, what is nature naturally doing and how can we work that, back into our lives? So in Western Australia, they are turning to worm farming for producing naturally healthier soil and crops. In fact, they've created something called earthworm tea, which when I first heard that title, I'm like, please tell me they're not chopping up earthworms and putting it in tea. I'm just not going to be able to run that story. But that's not what it is. Earthworm tea is a natural fertilizer byproduct of worm castings. And then this byproduct is used, and it's a key for cycling nutrients and improving soil quality, as well as agricultural sustainability. So again, it's what nature's naturally doing, but we have gotten so far away from this. And we've talked about this in other New Earth segments, and we've talked to cattlemen and ranchers about how we have to get all of these nasty chemicals out of our farming system. And this is one way you can do that through worm agriculture. All right, let's focus on some of our regional stories. And we do like 15 to 20 regional stories in each newscast. So for this podcast, what I do is I look at all the stories and I try to see if I see any like common denominators, any topics that keep popping up in the various newscasts. So I've broken it down to 3 different categories for this past week. We've got some health stories for you, some stories about schools, as well as information about workers and employment. So let's first start with our health stories. In the U.S., hospitals and surgery centers are requiring advanced payments for medical procedures. Now, as you can imagine, this is placing some additional financial burden on individuals. There's, a lot of people are struggling with just being able to pay their normal bills. So being able to, or being forced to pay these things in advance, that is causing some issues. Now, the hospitals want this because they are also having problems with collecting unpaid bills. It has been challenging. It has been costly. But then, like I said, on the patient side of it, that's very difficult for patients to pay up front for these procedures. So there's a lot of instances of overcharging, and that has forced patients to battle for refunds. It's complicated everything for them. They're going through a lot of struggles, and that's on top of whatever health issue they're going through. So we know that there is a lot of issues. We talked about this in the World Situation Report with governments being funded. They are out of money. So I can only imagine how this is impacting the health system because the government gives our, quote, health care, which is really sick care system, a lot of money. So we're seeing this trickle down in various ways. Now, in South Africa, this is another story. In South Africa, their president has signed the National Health Insurance Act into law. Now, this aims to provide universal health care for their citizens. The bill addresses issues with the overburdened public health sector, which serves about 84% of their population, as well as the private sector. The new law will limit private insurance and their role, as well as create a public fund for free health care access, setting prices for services. Now, critics say that they think it could strain public finances, even reduce care, overall quality, and also drive doctors abroad. In Kenya, we're going to talk about some counterfeit cancer medicines that are on the market that officials are trying to warn the public about. It is regarding a medication called Herceptin, 440 milligrams. This impacts the drug itself, the packaging, the labeling, the contents, everything is fake. It's all counterfeit. And it has not been approved for sale, obviously, because it could result in severe health risks to individuals. The medication is typically prescribed to treat and prevent the growing of cancer cells, especially in early-stage breast cancer patients. So if you usually take this medicine or know someone that does, I would just check with your doctor to make sure that it is the right type of medicine for you. In India, their cancer rates are spiking. I don't know if you know this, but India is known as the cancer capital of the world. And they are even seeing more cases of cancer. So it's rising. They say the surge is caused by unhealthy lifestyles as well as exposure to carcinogens, which is a toxin. Both adults and children are being diagnosed at earlier stages as compared to other countries. And there are a lot of issues here in trying to prevent this from happening. They say that there is a lack of pediatric oncology. They don't have proper facilities. There's financial challenges. And then there's low screening rates. So there's a lot of people that aren't even going to get screened to see if they do have cancer. And our final health story is about fake fentanyl in the U.S. So law enforcement have seized more than 115 million counterfeit fentanyl pills, and that was in 2023. This is an increase from 71 million in 2022. These fake pills, they look like the legal prescription, but the problem is they're even more lethal. I mean, if that could even happen, right? You guys have probably seen some of the documentaries out there about the issues with fentanyl. Fentanyl is a synthetic opioid that is 50 times stronger than heroin, and it's responsible for 70% of the drug overdose deaths in the U.S. And it's frustrating because there are a lot of people that wouldn't normally take like street drugs and things like that, but would take a prescription from their doctor. And like I said, you may have seen some of the documentaries out there, and this is how people get hooked on it because they're in a lot of pain and they don't realize how addictive this pill is. And now you've got counterfeit fentanyl pills that are killing more people because of the ingredients. And it's estimated that fentanyl is causing more than 200 fatalities a day in the U.S. All right, let's talk a little bit about what's happening in our schools around the world. So in the U.S., there are many school districts that are facing budget shortfalls as federal pandemic relief funds are being cut off. Now, the cuts are leading to the loss of hundreds of educational jobs. That includes teachers and staff hired with these temporary funds. And they say the reductions are happening as a result to dropping enrollment, a rising operational cost like insurance, as well as utilities. This could also affect newly hired educators that are often the first to go when budget issues arise. Also in the U.S., this is kind of a more uplifting story for you guys because I know a lot of this is kind of heavy, but we want to be real with what's happening in our world right now. There are elementary schools in Michigan that have introduced service dogs to help students reduce anxiety and boost their learning. I feel like this goes back to what I was talking about earlier with wanting to be around animals and benefit, from that exchange, that natural boost of energy and happiness that we sometimes get when we're around these types of beings. And so in Michigan, they have this program called Priority Pups. And this has placed golden doodles in 2 districts, and they have plans for expansion. But what they have found is that this has positively impacted students, especially students with behavioral and emotional challenges. Some of the other benefits include enhanced learning, improved attitudes, reduced stress levels, improved literacy, then the scores that are associated with learning, as well as smoother peer interactions. All right, let's switch from the U.S. Let's talk a little bit about things that are happening school-wise in China. So Chinese and Hong Kong students studying abroad are facing intimidation and surveillance. This is happening more and more, and it's resulting in emotional stress and depression for these students. Authorities are targeting these students to prevent dissent. So anyone that might be talking not so good about China. This includes threats to family members in China. They are threatening them with job termination, pension cuts, education restrictions, and they're actually using digital surveillance to figure out, okay, who is talking bad about China. This is primarily done through the app WeChat. And at least for the authorities that are doing this, they say it has been an effective monitoring tool for censoring students abroad. As horrible as that sounds, they're actually getting results by doing this. Some students even have concerns about returning home, and they're contemplating seeking asylum to escape repression. Amnesty International is encouraging universities and governments to provide better protection and counseling for these students. Also, in China, China's Ministry of Education has announced a campaign to target excessive homework and school bullying. Now, I kind of take these stories with a grain of salt because we just told you a story about what the Chinese government is doing for students that are abroad. Are they really treating their own citizens this well? Are they really concerned with excessive homework and school bullying? They've never been interested in this before. So, just make a little note of that. Is this their own propaganda to offset other things that are going on and bad promotion of China? Now let's focus on workers and employment. So in Germany, they have some of the shortest working hours when compared to other advanced economies. In fact, there has been a 30% decrease in working hours during the last 5 decades. That sounds good, right? They say this is attributed to German women working part-time, as well as a societal shift toward valuing leisure time more. However, there are some other concerns with people that get paid lower wages. They have less motivation to really increase their hours to make up for this due to high taxes and reduced benefits. The German government is seeking solutions with proposals like tax relief on overtime and reforms to unemployment benefits. In Romania, there was actually a protest. Thousands of union members protested outside of parliament, demanding reduced wage taxation. They are criticizing their government for creating a labor market unfavorable to workers, leading to the emigration of about 5 million Romanians seeking better pay abroad. So they're losing their workers. They highlighted the high taxation burden, with more than 42% of their gross income being taxed, which is above the European Union average of 38%. And they say that this contributes to Romania's low employment rate, which is ranked amongst the lowest in the EU. And finally, we have a story out of Spain with regard to remote workers and cafes. So places where you get coffee, okay? Cafes in Spain are taking a stand against remote workers who are overstaying their welcome. Now, I don't know if you guys have noticed this. I've gone to like Starbucks sometimes. You get a coffee in the morning and there's people out there with their laptops. And I often wonder, like, how long are they staying? It would drive me crazy, by the way. I don't think I could do work with people constantly coming in and, orders being announced and stuff like this. But I don't know. Maybe some people thrive in that environment. But according to these cafes in Spain, teleworkers are occupying tables for long periods of time with, they just purchase like a single coffee and then they stay there for hours. So obviously, in the mind of the cafes, they could be losing business because new people could be coming in, sitting down, enjoying their coffee and leaving. It kind of disrupts things a little bit. So what some cafes have done is they have turned off their Wi-Fi and they have banned laptops during peak hours. Can you imagine having to go up to someone and being, sorry, you can't have that, laptop here between the hours of like noon to 2 or something like that? I'm sure that those people aren't liked very much. They are also asking laptop users to move for their regular customers. And it seems like the people that are working remotely are kind of tired of this. It is a little bit of an issue, right? So many digital nomads are turning to co-working spaces. Those are becoming increasingly popular in Spain's major cities. All right, let's talk about what happened this week in the World Situation Report. So I'm going to do this in sequential order. We're going to start with Monday, then we'll go to Wednesday, and then Friday's pretty short. Kim actually wasn't on the news on Friday, but I did read a statement. But there's still a ton of stuff that happened this week. So a lot of stuff we got to get through what happened on Monday and Wednesday. Let's start with Monday. Kim was introduced, and this actually happened over the weekend prior. She was introduced to a new group of beings. Now, when Kim gets introduced to new beings, my ears perk up because Kim knows a lot. And so if it's a group of beings that she hasn't heard of before, I find this to be extremely interesting. And so she asked Source, God, the creator of the universe, about this. And Source said they're called the Ancient Ones. And then later, when Kim was able to, I'm going to say meet. I don't know if you actually meet, if it's telepathic, I guess so. But she was able to meet these beings, and they refer to themselves as celestials. So Kim has explained this before, but Kim doesn't know everything, right? She's got a job to do. And sometimes she doesn't know about things until they're supposed to happen. Because you can imagine if God were to give Kim the complete outline of how to restore the planet, that is a bit overwhelming for our human brains to comprehend. So you find out things as you need to know about them. And apparently now is the time we needed to know about these beings because they had a job to do. And this ties in with us being able to transfer money directly to the people. Because Kim has talked before about, listen, there is something, we're on the last level here, but there is something preventing this. And, she tries to clean and clear as much as possible. But again, she doesn't always have all of the information. Apparently, she got to a point where God decided to take over. And this involves this group of beings called the Celestials, which, by the way, I found this really interesting. They existed even before souls existed. So they're older than all of us. Here is Kim talking about this new group of beings and how they're here to help us during this transition.
I've been cleaning the system and trying to get any remnants out of it so that we could pass some money through. Uh, Sans, this isn't even about the humans anymore. This is just junk.
Yeah.
So I got to a point where there was something interesting that appeared to be standing in our way. Couldn't quite place it. Didn't look evil. Didn't look positive. Didn't look like it was something, that I would normally see. So I had to go ask the question, what is this? Well, for the most part, this is a team effort, right? It's myself, it's source, it's all the beings that have come to help us and make this change, to go through this period of transition. So I was introduced to a new group of folks, let's call them the folks, that I had never met before. And this group originally, earlier in the day, were described to me as the ancient ones by Source. So Source said these were the ancient ones. And then later on, they kind of identified themselves as something called the Celestials.
Okay.
Now, through the course of this, I learned some new things. I'm always learning new things. My cup is always empty, and you always find things out exactly at the moment you're supposed to know them and never before. Right. And this was another one of those instances where it was just time. So we have gotten finally to a point where most of what was put in place by others, most of them negative others, is pretty well gone. So it was time to make a huge change in the universe, which means that there is a huge change occurring on Earth. Now, the huge change has to do with the creation of all that is and all that ever will be. So there is a base root for all that is, and we see that as source, but all that is, I would say, not a program as in a computer program, but this was more about a process. Let's call it a process, because I'm trying to find a word in English that would compare to what I saw this weekend. So at the beginning of all creation in the universe, there was a spark that created all that is, which means that until that point, there was nothing but source itself. There was no life, there was no planets, and we've talked about this through the Genesis, what descriptions in the Bible and those types of things. But this was really interesting for me. So after the very beginning, the first spark of all that is, so all of creation, there were some beings that were created called the Celestials. Now, the Celestials they're not your biblical version of angels. They were even before they existed, and even before souls existed for other life. They were the first. They almost look like clones of Source, is the best way I can describe them. Not in a nefarious way, but it seemed to be a division of a piece of Source that created these 9 beings.
Okay. There's
hugely
9 of
tall.
them. 9. Okay.
9 of them. Yeah. There was 9 of them. In the beginning, there was only 9 of them that were light.
Okay.
Eventually, towards the very end of all that is, or the creation of all that is, there was 9 dark as well.
Oh.
Yep. And 9 neutral. So the 9 light talked about the beginning of creation and kind of how it all worked. So the first thing that was brought forward was the all that is. The second thing that was brought forward was actually, let's see, it was Earth. Earth unto itself. Now, at this time, Earth was not a planet. um, Earth was a form. It had a form to it, but it was pretty much just light. The same thing with the celestials. Now, each one of these celestials represented a different aspect of source, what it seemed like to me. We also had one for essence, consciousness, and energy. We also had another for wisdom. And wisdom, interestingly enough, was explained to me in a whole new way this weekend. So we think of wisdom, we think of, oh, this is your intuition, this is your direct connection to source. Source gives you the information. And because things are constantly changing, it's kind of like a help and a guidance, and it's your connection with source. But the way that source described wisdom, and also crystalline time, because there was one being that represented time, and I'm like, oh no, we don't want time. Time is bad. But this was also explained to me differently. So this was kind of a really super interesting experience that happened on Saturday. So with wisdom, he says it's the whisper in the wind. It's the weaver of the fabric of reality, believe it or not. So it's not a language unto itself like light or love would be. And frequency is kind of a molder, but wisdom is like I don't want to use the word program. I want to use the word, how do I describe this? We talk about natural law, and we talk about the flow of nature and how it all kind of synergistically works together.
Right.
We have plants that grow, plants that deteriorate. There's a bacteria, and then another plant grows in its place, and life is a continuous circle. Wisdom is actually given to every living thing, not a program.
Is it like an instinct, Kim, that these plants would have, or animal instinct? That's not it. That's not what
a knowingness. So there's a knowingness in, for example, your body. You know, you don't have to think to breathe. It's a knowingness. Right. It's your body knows how to function in this environment. It will even adapt and change and overcome based on your environment. So if you are living in, say, the far north of Siberia in Russia, your blood will be thicker than if you lived in the deserts of Saudi Arabia.
Yeah.
Your body has a knowingness in a natural way to change, adapt, overcome, to automatically have your cells communicate with one another in a hopefully in a homeostasis sort of way, where everything just is synergistic. So wisdom is what creates the synergy between all forms of life. It's the weaver of the fabric of reality. It is the base root of all that is. It organizes all that is. Maybe that's the word I'm looking for. It pulls everything together into an actual life form. So I didn't really understand, just how important wisdom was until this weekend. And this is just me. I mean, I'm honestly, I'm not told everything all at once, just like you are. Sometimes we get the information right when we need it. And this was one of those times. The other one I wanted to point out, I mean, love is kind of a given. We know what that is. Frequency, that's an obvious. But when it came time for time, I kind of panicked because I'm like, oh, we don't want time back. What do you mean you have someone, there is a celestial for time? So it seems like each element had its own celestial, for lack of a better term, and therefore we have 9 of them, plus source, of course, plus 1. And so time was explained to me in a different way. It's based upon distance. Now, This is crystalline time per se, without interruption. And what I mean by distance, and I mean it's a distance between all that is. So, for example, if you lived in the 8th density, you have less time than we have here in the 3rd density. What that means is that every particle of energy, every particle of consciousness, every atom within your body is closer together there in the 8th density than it is here. Mm. It's that distance between them that creates your so-called vibration here on Earth, as they call it, but it also creates your matter as dense as it actually is, which also, unfortunately, eventually, upon the Great Divide, which happened at the last part of the creation of all that is, allowed for more darkness to exist in the spaces in between as well. Mm-hmm. It's kind of what made you in a light-dark universe. Therefore, we had a lot more cleaning up in the 3rd density than for, say, someone in the 5th.
Sure.
So, and those spaces in between is what we have been focusing on cleaning from your person. And by doing so, we had to remove a lot of the space junk that was manipulating those spaces in between. I mean, and this is less than a zeptosecond. This is such a small distance between these places, but it's distance nonetheless. And the exciting part about these celestials, so let's just talk about what happened. So it was now time, right? Time. It was now time for, based on Source's decision, for the celestials to get together and to recreate all that is. By recreating all that is, because now they're up, right? So the darkness is mostly gone. Source is integrating back with Source. We don't have anti-Source anymore. There's nothing left in the Omega-verse. But in order to create infinity, eternity, and immortality, all that is had to be recreated in a different way. So time or space had to be created in a different way, as an example, in your person. I know, so confusing, and I'm trying to give it to you in a way that you'll understand. So this all began on Saturday evening, and by early this morning, my time, that process was just about complete. Now, once all that is was created in its likeness, meaning in the likeness of light source, in order to create a light, infinite, eternal, and immortal universe, then it was time for the dark celestials to give up their all that is, or all that isn't, I guess you could say. Yeah. And then the neutrals as well, because now everything was safe on this side. So the recreation, so we didn't lose any beings, if that makes any sense, in the process.
So this process could have resulted in changes in your person. And I believe all of this is wrapped up now, but I'm talking about this past week. If you felt uncomfortable, like uncomfortable in your own skin, if you were having trouble regulating your body temperature, perhaps your breathing patterns, maybe you had moments of mental fogginess and you didn't understand certain things, this could have been happening to you. Now, the good news is the changes did not last long, maybe a few hours, up to a day or so. Again, we should be out of this by now. But overall, this is a very positive thing. Kim mentioned that what the celestials are doing, like it's taking them days to do what it took Kim months to do. So this, Kim believes, is the last part of this whole process, so that we can remove all of that darkness, the dark energy, dark matter, all of that, and space junk. She talks about space junk a lot. That could be prohibiting us from moving forward with restoration in the financial capacity, right? Getting funding to do the projects that we need to do. She also mentioned a couple things. I hate dwelling on the deep state, but there are some somewhat interesting things that they did. I mean, they're in their last moments of desperation. I feel like this is the longest death scene I've ever seen. You know, some of those movies where it's like, would this character die already? Like, come on. How many times can you come back from the from the grave, so to speak? So we've talked before, was it last week? Kim talked about pushing and putting this Faraday shield, I'll call it, around the earth. That is not to harm us, of course, in any way. It is to prevent anything from coming against us, from stealing our essence, from stealing our energy. Well, the deep state had an alternative, like a way to get around that, although it really didn't work. It just hurt them even more. And that was certain deep state members took these injections. And Kim says she doesn't think that they were properly informed about what these injections actually did. But what it did is allow any remnants of the Omega system. It basically allowed these people to act as kind of like an antenna to help prolong, get like any remnants of the Omega system out of these people so they could use it to do whatever nefarious thing they were trying to do. Because if you're in a Faraday cage or shield, that darkness can't come from another place. So now they're thinking, okay, can we use any of the darkness that's here? And that is what they plan to do. But what it actually does in the process is it drains the life force from these people. And it didn't work at all. They did not get enough power from that. It's also like a horrible thing to do to people. So that's the deep state for you. But that is something that they tried to do over this last week to counter what Kim was doing with the Faraday shield around planet Earth. The other thing that Kim talks a little bit about that I'll just briefly mention is soul swapping and something that happened. So we know that certain deep state characters, even some of the people that we see on television, celebrities, politicians, various people in government, if you wanted to be in their club, there was a ceremony that they would do on their 40th birthday usually. We talked about the Trump video of what Trump did on his 40th birthday. Sorry, guys, if you're Trump fans, he is not a good guy whatsoever. He is just like the rest of them, just on a different team, okay? So there were these ceremonies they would do, and they would do horrible things to children, eat horrible things. I don't really want to go into a lot of detail, but think the worst, and it's probably 5 steps higher than that. But this is to prove their loyalty, and part of that involved a soul swap. So Kim has explained this before, but essentially their real souls would go down to the lower astral and it would be replaced with some sort of being, okay? A negative being. And if you were really, really high on their list of people they wanted to use for nefarious purposes, then you might get something from Lucifer himself. So this is something new that Kim just found out. People were reaching out to her claiming they were Lucifer incarnate. And it didn't make sense to her because she's like, okay, there can't be all of these Lucifers. What is going on? Well, actually, there can be, because we found out that Lucifer made clones of, it's kind of like an artificial soul, an AI soul of Lucifer. This was an offshoot of the Omega system. And instead of getting just a regular nasty soul from the lower astral, if you were super duper important, you could get an AI cloned soul of Lucifer, which makes sense as to why all these people were claiming they were Lucifer incarnate. Now, the reason this is important to know now is because with the Omega system going away completely and, them trying to inject each other just to, try to get any remnants of this Omega system, these beings that have these AI-generated souls are going away as well. And they actually know this is happening. And they're informing other deep state members that they're dying. And there's nothing they can do to stop it. Kim did not go into detail as to who this impacted because some of these people you would know. based on things on the internet, people in media, things like that. So could we start to see a lot of generals departing? Could we see a lot of prominent people in Italy and Russia go away? We could. It also depends on if they want to replace these beings with some sort of crazy masked person as well. But they are going away. They are dying because they have an artificial heart from the lower astral, and all of that is going away. Okay, so that was just what happened on Monday, guys. We talked about a ton of stuff. Now, on Wednesday, Kim talks more about cicadas. Cicada? Is that like tomato? I'm not really quite sure how you pronounce it. Cicada, cicada. So interesting sidebar note. For a while, my senior year of college, I went to school at Ohio University. And that was the year of the cicadas. We had these bugs. Oh my gosh. It felt like they were just all around you. They were humming and almost felt like an electricity. And they would fall to the ground. You accidentally stepped on them. I mean, they would be shoveling these things. So whenever I think of cicadas, I think of my senior year of college because they were every year. They were everywhere. Okay, the reason we're talking about this now is if you've been following anything in alternative media, they've been talking about the year of the cicada, okay? And you may think that they're talking about these bugs that, come it's like every 20 or 25 years. They're like dormant and then they appear and they're everywhere. It's like, oh, there's too many of us. We got to get out. And so when you hear this in the alternative media, they're not actually talking about the bug. What they're talking about is a deep state program that was dormant for a long period of time that the deep state would have access to flip on when they chose to. And they were hoping to cause a lot of damage with this. So I want to play a soundbite about Project Cicada, and who this impacted, because the deep state was trying to, actually it wasn't even the deep state. Well, they're part of the deep state. Depends on who you consider to be part of, quote unquote, the deep state. The SSP people were trying to get access to this program to turn it on to take over the world, because the SSP are entitled little brats, and I'm sorry, but that is the truth. Their program has been around for a very long time, and they think they own everything. So they can't do things on their own, but they try to take over other systems to try to take over the world, and this is one that they tried to do this week. So here is Kim explaining the Cicada program, and what it was meant to do.
One thing I wanted to bring up, because it keeps coming up over and over and over again, and in the alt media, there's a lot of fear about this being promoted. Also in mainstream media, about this being the year of the cicada. Now, cicada, the insect, has a few habits, and one of them being they remain dormant for a number of years. And then every 20 or so years, 25, I think it is, something like that, we have an enormous amount of cicadas during the spring, spring into early summer. And when certain folks, that have a clock and some other folks in the alt media talk about the year of the cicada, they're not talking about some bugs and, in abundance, I should say, around the country here in the US and in other parts of the world. They're actually talking about a group of people.
Okay.
So let's talk about Project Cicada. Now, Project Cicada is similar in a lot of ways to programs you've heard of, such as the Monarch program, MK Ultra, Super Soldier programs, and the cicadas are very similar. It's for a different reason and done a little differently, and it is not a US-based program, although it infiltrates into the United States. Now, the cicada program is over 1,000 years old. It was very heavily tied to specific locations in Japan, but also throughout China. Now, the program was actually run by a lady that's no longer with us, known as Mei Hua. And whomever 1,000 years ago was inhabited by the being we know as Lilith. We talked about the Lucifer inhabitants. Well, we also had Lilith inhabitants. So, which happened throughout history, and more than one, sometimes at a time, being one of them. And the program was actually designed, they put out these puzzles they call Cicada 3301. And the puzzles are designed, there's various like cyber puzzles, cryptex puzzles, other things you might see in an IQ test, or you might see them in other types of personality tests, like if you ever had to do those for a job, or psychological evaluations, those types of things. But this is on a much higher level. And their goal is to source out children and young adults to become a part of the Cicada program, because they have exhibited extreme intelligence, but also exhibit behaviors that they do not find desirable, such as a fear of authority and things like that. They would like to have that. So you also have to be a person that fits into a very specific psychological profile as well in order to enter into the program. Now, the purpose of the program is to recruit these intelligent humans, individuals, to train them and to bring them up in a specific industry that they may have shown a specific type of intellect for, such as, maybe they are recruited for cyber work, and then they eventually go on to work for the NSA or any one of the Nine Eyes programs underneath the NSA. They could go to Pine Gap. They could go into politics. They could go into becoming a political aide somewhere. Militaries, Joint Chiefs of Staff, or whatever it's called in other nations by the same name. They do the same thing. Heads and directors of intelligence agencies. These kids are specifically placed throughout all power centers of the world to include, for example, universities, as professors, as teachers, as research and development persons. They work in national laboratories in every single country in the world. They are everywhere. Now, the Cicada program was actually designed to give a person, we know Maywa in this particular case at this time, even though she's not here anymore, full control over the entire world. So at a moment's notice, she could activate the cicadas, and the cicadas would then take over their respective places of employment. Yeah, be it a government, be it an intelligence agency, you name it, this is what the cicadas were designed to do. Now, activation. Let's talk a little bit about that, because this is something that's come up in the last 48 hours. So gotta love the deep state always. So activation of a cicada to its fullest degree, and with information and with monetary support, was not as easy as the SSP would have liked. The system is highly secured. They believe that not too long ago, they were in Osaka, Japan, and they had acquired the database of cicadas. So a log of all the cicadas that were around the world and specific things that would activate them. However, Maywa, much like the rest of the people in the world, are not as stupid as the SSP. Because nobody puts out all of your wares in one database. No one does that. No one. And Maywa was no exception. Now, the activation of a cicada group can be done in a number of different ways. And the ways that they are familiar with has to do with phrases or a little song, a little jingle, but you have to do it in a specific order, and it has to be accompanied by a specific frequency, and so on and so forth, so that the cicada is triggered as to what their orders are, because they're planted deep in their subconscious memory as part of this program. So in the absence of Meiwa, they did not have the final key. But something they found very exciting happened based on it being about 1,008 years after the program began. And that was a fake, let's just say a fake depository of money appeared on behalf of the cicadas this year. Because this year was supposed to be the total takeover of the Meiwa. Remember, we were going to have a harvest ceremony and, these events were going to take place. And so when I mean by fake money, it's a bunch of numbers on a screen with no allocation numbers.
Okay.
And no cooperation from Alpha. But we did see it pop up yesterday. So this gave them hope that if they could activate the cicadas to work for them, then now they've got a full-on army to take over the entire world. Brilliant, right?
How many people are we talking about, do you think, that were involved in this program?
Well, they are regular humans. Some are enhanced, some are not enhanced physically. I would say there's probably some things they do to make them smarter in order to eliminate the governors on your brain, that kind of thing. I would say, it's been going on for over 1,000 years. No one is 1,000 years old in the program. So, millions, maybe hundreds of thousands.
And they don't realize they're in the program?
They believe that they have gone to a school for exceptionally smart children. That's what they believe. They have gone on into their respective field. They have excelled at their respective field. They definitely have an intention of, for them, they kind of keep a close-knit circle amongst themselves. And for them, this is where a little bit of heartburn comes in for us. Like, what do we do here? Because for them, they seem to be intelligent people. They are very logical minded. There is no emotion, so to speak, when it comes to making decisions. It's all 100% logical. And they could, utilize their skills for something positive. But the SSP has a grip on them and has a database of who they are and where they are. So I'm a little bit concerned for their own selves. And then I know they'll never find the final key to activate the cicadas for their benefit. That's for sure. Mainly because the final key for that would be in my system. I kind of took that. And then there's a whole master key that was involved, which I also took over. So I know that they'll never be activated for a negative purpose. And I haven't gone into it deep enough to find out if they can be utilized for a positive purpose, because I've never seen anybody try to activate them before. We talked a little bit about the school in Japan. It's also part of that program. And children are recruited from all over the world for this purpose. So got to be an assessment here before we make any kind of real decisions. But the SSP is watching them all now. And
just monitoring them to see what they're doing, or they're obviously trying to activate them, but that's not going to work.
Yeah. So that money kind of flashed up on the screen for a short period of time yesterday. It's not real. It was fake, but numbers on a screen flashed up and they got all excited. And when they couldn't access it, they thought that there might be something I might do that might trigger the access to it. I don't know. Maybe this is in one of their weirdo books. And that never happened. The other thing is they have kidnapped a couple of these cicadas to try to see if they had the access codes to access it.
Like, is there a hierarchy? Are there like higher level cicadas or something that?
Well, it's kind of like the old trustee program that existed for, say, the Order of the Dragon, or for even the families. It's 2 keys to get in and 3 keys to get out. And the 3rd key was always held by Marduk back in those days. Yeah. And it was the same way, the cicadas worked the same way with Meiwa, who is no longer with us. And the thing that crawled up inside her is no longer with us either, anywhere in the multiverse. So there's no real key except for the keys that I have now made for myself, because why? Because I control the system. So I can make those keys disappear or appear anytime I want to. But, and they were pretty frustrated that they couldn't actually activate it. Now, they did manage to get some information from some of them that were aware of a program that could potentially trigger last night that would allow them some access. It was a backup system, if you will, that existed in the following locations: New Zealand, Democratic Republic of Congo, and in Papua New Guinea. So all three locations were, either a mountain or, in Bukavu, same thing, in the Democratic Republic of Congo. And then they were tied to a center underneath Maryland, where the NSA used to actually perform a function, but they can't really do that anymore. So needless to say, all four sites were cleared out in rapid succession, which gave me much joy because they took my consciousness, in essence, and tried to use my key to open up their system. And that didn't work out for them either. So goodbye, good riddance. So sorry, not sorry. Sorry, not sorry. And if they do it again, we will get more of you. And then we will also get the people that ordered such a thing, like we're doing today, as an example. So we'll be less a few operatives around the world for being just flat out stupid, and liking to have world domination based on a bunch of cicadas.
Oh, boy. Okay, so that didn't quite work out in their favor. And there's nothing to be concerned about with this program because, like Kim said, she has the keys that they would need to complete this activation. But we do try to keep you guys updated on what they're doing, even though their efforts keep failing time and time again. We've kind of lost track on how much they've been failing. I do also want to give you a quick update. So a celestial update, because that's more fun stuff to focus on, right? So the quick update that Kim talked about on Wednesday is there is now no division amongst the celestials. So on Monday, she was talking about, okay, the positive or the light celestials, they just wrapped up, and now the neutral celestials have to give up their power, their programs that they were running, and then you continue on through the darker celestials. And so now that part has wrapped up. There is no division amongst the celestials. There are only light, positive celestials. It is going to take a little bit of time for these changes to permeate throughout the multiverse. We do not know the exact amount of time. Kim does not think it's going to be a long period of time. In fact, on Wednesday's newscast, she was hoping to have some really positive news for us on Friday. So a little bit of a bummer. Friday rolls along and Kim is super duper busy with crazy stuff that the deep state is doing. So I do not have an update for you on where things stand as of right now with the celestials. I'm sure Kim is going to be on the news on Monday, if at all possible, unless, she's running operations and things like that. And if that's the case, I'll try to, get an update on the celestials if we haven't heard by that time. Earlier this week, I did ask him, listen, if we have moved past these blockages that were preventing humanity from getting funding for their projects, will you be on the news, meaning so we can see you on video, to share this information? And she said she would. So I'm hoping Monday she's on the news. We will see. We don't know, guys. This has never been done in the history of creation. Earth is extremely unique. And so we don't know. We don't know exactly what's going to happen. And so I'm kind of on pins and needles, just like probably a lot of you. So even though Kim wasn't on the news on Friday, she did provide a statement, which I read just to give you some basic updates. It doesn't talk about the celestials, but let me read this for you because this is what I read on the news. Here we go. Kim is currently in meetings today as tensions rise between global headquarters, the treasuries, and governments. Monetary promises again fell flat as servers showing fake money at the Bogota, Colombia central bank crash. China's deep state is caught in a lie last night when they told the world they controlled the Alpha system as they failed to prove their access. Looks like lies are not buying them time anymore. If there are any breaking news developments, Kim will update us over the weekend. Otherwise, she will be back with us on Monday. Fingers crossed, everybody. Fingers crossed. As of today, there have been no new updates. So if there's nothing tomorrow on Sunday, then hopefully we will get an update from Kim on Monday. So a lot of stuff has happened. I would understand if you need to replay this episode again, but this is amazing stuff for the betterment of humanity. We are on this planet at such an important time. Like I said earlier, I believe if you are listening to this, then you are part of this plan for the restoration. And there's a lot of things that you can do. It's all about using your gifts and your abilities for the betterment of all organic beings, not just humanity, but everything that's here. And having fun in the process. This is incredible, you guys. So what do you do now? Keep asking questions. Keep thinking critically. Use your own discernment. We talked about a lot of stuff. You could do a little bit more research into these topics. You can share this podcast episode with people you care about. You can also just tell them about United Network News and what we're trying to do. If you want to take it that next step, if you want to become a member and get all access to all of our content right when it comes out, you can do that at unitednetwork.earth. That includes all of our UNN newscasts, our complete world situation reports, and we also have some original series as well that I think you're really going to like. This also gives you the ability to download and get all the access through our UNN app. When our videos are posted, there is an area where you can make comments. I'm usually in there trying to answer questions. Sometimes Kim is in there as well, so that's a great way to connect with us. But there's also we have an amazing community that has a lot of answers as well. So we appreciate those of you that are in there, that are commenting to help other people. We also have something called United Chat, where you can post your own links and articles and things like that to help educate our community as well. And don't forget, you can follow us on social media. If you go to unitednetwork.earth, in the bottom navigation, all of our links are there. So thank you guys so much for listening to today's episode. I really appreciate it. I know it was a lot to consume, but a lot of good stuff, right? It's about time. It's about time we get good information for the betterment of all organic beings. I love this. This is The Rundown, and I'm Sunny Galt for United Network News, signing off.